Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Speak Like a Pro, practical tips to nail your confidence, delivery, and impact. I'm really excited to have one of my friends, Clay Hebert, here with us today to talk about the theme of practice and practicing effectively. Clay is an entrepreneur and a marketer. He's one of the world's leading crowdfunding experts and has helped over 50 entrepreneurs raise over $5 million and counting on popular crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, which just blows my mind, Clay. Clay is a popular speaker and he engages audiences around the globe on innovation, creativity, marketing, entrepreneurship, and the future. Clay, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jenny. I'm super excited.
Yes. I know you had a really influential 6 months. I don't even know what year this was, where you were working with Seth Godin. And
Yeah.
since that time, and you were at Accenture for 10 years.
Yep.
And now you're this leading crowdfunding expert and speaker. Can you share a little bit about that journey with us?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I was at Accenture for 10 years, the world's largest consulting firm, 250, probably 300,000 people now. Just really massive. And you're kind of just a number in this huge company, right? And it was 2003. I was flying through the O'Hare airport, and I liked to read business books on my flight. I noticed this strange-looking book in the bookstore, and it was called Purple Cow, and I grabbed it and read it. This is 2003, and it totally changed how I looked at business and marketing and life. I finished the book on the plane, went home and subscribed to Seth's blog, read everything else he'd ever put out, and I was super excited because I was going to bring this new innovation and creativity into this company where I had a good established career. I was about halfway through my career at Accenture, and they talked a lot of innovation, but the way that the business works, when you have 300,000 employees, mainline consultants, you need to be able to move them from project to project. So a lot of the training and stuff was around making people sort of interchangeable. So it was a great company to work for a while, but in 2008, I got a chance to escape and study directly with Seth for 6 months. So January through July of 2009 was when the program was. And it was really amazing to just learn from one of my heroes and mentors and idols about really directly from him. And it was a really neat, he called it the alternative MBA. And it was neat because he told a lot of stories of his career coming up, everything from speaking to meetings he's had and the psychology of marketing and everything else. So it's similar themes as to what he talks about and writes about, but it was more like having a conversation and hearing firsthand. So the lesson that he might write on his blog in 3 paragraphs, we got a little bit of the behind the scenes of, oh, I learned that because this thing happened, and this is why these things are important. So yeah, it was a really interesting journey. And then since then, just been helping big companies with marketing. And then in the last couple of years, since January 2012, helping a lot of entrepreneurs get their projects funded on these crowdfunding platforms. So it's been super exciting. I'm super blessed. I was happy to escape the 10 years of corporate America. I know you escaped corporate America as well.
Right.
So I left in about 2009. Yeah, it's just been a really, really exciting ride.
Wow. And how has your speaking evolved in the years since you left?
Yeah, so I actually did a bit of speaking when I was with Accenture, but it was mostly industry conferences around. So I was in the healthcare and the pharma and med device group within Accenture. So it was really pretty mind-numbingly boring to me, content around how to help these big companies price their stents and pacemakers and things like that. Not very inspirational, not very creative. And then since Seth's program, I've been doing more speaking on marketing and crowdfunding and innovation, the future of work, because the same problem that I experienced, that these big companies don't necessarily, they talk a big game for innovation, but it's really hard to implement. Felt the same as far as when I escaped. Now I can talk about that stuff in a totally new way and explain. I've seen both sides of it. I've seen the inside of where the innovation is lacking, and now having lived outside of it for so long, I kind of want to, just grab people by the collar and be like, can't you see that this is maybe, the same mistakes that Blockbuster made in losing to Netflix and things like that, and like true innovation. When Clayton Christensen talks about innovation as far as Airbnb disrupting, let's say, Hilton can't become Airbnb. So it's fun to talk about those things. And as far as speaking, I think one great tip that I've learned that took me a little bit too long to learn is there's a difference between inspirational speaking and sort of informational speaking or tactical. And what I've realized is companies generally want to inspire. There are tactical, informational, step-by-step, but those tend to be the blog world type conferences. And often those are not the paid speaking gigs. So I know a lot of the people watching this now want to sort of move their practice either from free gigs to paid gigs or paid gigs to more paid gigs. And one of the big things I've learned in the last few years is it's not the same type of speech. If you look at Seth's talks or Sir Ken Robinson or those kind of things, it's inspiring. It's not a how-to. And I think us as practitioners, we know certain things, so we love to give a talk. We'd like to default the talk to the how-to, and there are very few paid speaking engagements where it's framed around a very instructional talk.
That's a really interesting distinction, and now with the ability to have an online platform, you can give the inspiration in the talk and then have the how-to supplementary elsewhere.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely.
Part of the theme of today is practice. How do you practice when you have a big engagement coming up?
Yeah, well, I'm better now than I used to be because I used to, unfortunately, not practice speeches because I would, not because I thought it was the right thing to do, but I would change my slides up until the last minute. And so I would maybe get one dry run in. And every book on speaking, this course, everything else, it's very, very clear the importance of practice. So what I try to do is two steps. One, finish the slides and the outline. Start with the outline. So I start with like a mind map and a theme. And then I try to finish the slides earlier. I like to include relevant things, so maybe news things or timely things, but now I've gotten where I can just swap that in at that particular spot. I know that I'm going to talk about something current. I like to, once I've done that, go through the flow myself, record it using ScreenFlow or microphone, and then play it back. Because even that, just hearing yourself, you'll notice spots where you thought your energy was high and it was really low. You'll notice spots where you stuttered or said or ah a lot. So I start with that, and then I usually wrangle a few friends, buy them beer or whatever I have to do, and just try to practice it, because it's really important to get in front of live people. And sometimes it's hard to architect, but I would say do whatever you have to do. It could be in your basement, it could be at a friend's house, but practice the timing, practice going through the slides, because the transitions are really, really important. Also, a big thing is practicing how you end the talk. I think if there's one thing I think that all speakers could improve on drastically, it's how they end their talks. And I've seen amazing, A+ TED type talks, and then literally at the end they're like, that's my time. That's all I have. And it just trails off, and it kills the whole energy and the impact of the rest of the talk. So what I've tried to do, and I stole some of this from Seth, is end with a really provocative question. You see this a bit at TED, or a statement or a claim, and it really should be not to use the idea of like dropping the mic and walking away, but that concept of I'm done speaking. You should know I'm done speaking. Ending with a bang and not trailing off is something that I found practice really, really helps with, because the audience, when they decide like how loud they're going to clap or if they're going to give you a standing ovation, a ton of it is based on what you just said in the last 10 seconds. And so if you can one thing I would say is practice the whole thing, practice your timing, practice your transitions, but really practice the last 30 seconds and the last minute, and maybe even practice that before you practice everything else. Because another thing I learned from Seth is the only reason to give a talk is to change the audience, to cause a change in the attendees that are there. Maybe you're inspiring them to lead a tribe. Maybe you're explaining and understanding, changing their mind about a certain societal issue. Maybe you're inspiring them to launch their dream via crowdfunding. But somehow you want to change the audience. It shouldn't just be inform, right? And that's, I think, why inspirational is so much more important than informational or as far as paid keynotes. So if your point is to change the audience, it's interesting to start with the end in mind.
Right.
And just, if it's hard to practice the whole hour and you're like, I can't get the room and the venue and my friends won't come, just practice nailing that last minute, and that will actually inform. If you change how that is or how you want to change the audience, that might change your upstream content. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Susan Weinschenk, another person, she wrote 100 Things Everybody Needs to Know About, or every presenter needs to know about people, also says, you do nothing else. Focus on the first 2 minutes and the last 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Now, this is a really nitpicky, very detailed question, but let's say you end on a really powerful message or a question.
Yeah.
How does the audience know you're done? Do you also say thank you? Or for you, do you just leave it, or what you learned observing people like Seth?
Yeah, I do. I give it a full pause to let them think, and you want to almost make them feel a touch uncomfortable, like, is he done? And then by saying thank you, you're answering their question, saying I am done. So that's what I've done is that interesting or inspirational quote or challenge or call to action for the audience, and then you got to say it powerfully, look straight at them, look them in the eye or eyes, pick out somebody. And then thank you.
I love it.
And then, it gives that pause of that, like, everything is silent. It's a bit of a state change in the room. And then when you say thank you, they know they're done, and everyone tends to clap.
I love it. I think so much of practice is practicing the pauses as much as what we're saying. It's really important. Yeah,
absolutely. And she's totally right about the first 2 minutes as well. One simple tip I would say, try to, and this is something I learned from Seth and later from Charles Green, who learned it from his speaking coach. Try not to start with, hi, I'm Jenny Blake, or hi, I'm Clay Hebert, and your story. Hopefully that's really well covered in your intro. The person that's introducing you, make sure that they introduce you in the appropriate way. You should write that script. You should know they know how to pronounce your name and things like that. So you should already have this intro, and the audience should know who you are. And so it is much more interesting. People expect you to say, hi, I'm Jenny Blake, and this is what I've done, and like your personal story. It's much more interesting to start with something they're not expecting. Like in 1956,
right?
Joe Pulitzer, just a story. Just start with the story and assume that the introduction was enough to explain to the audience who you are, and then just pull them in. Pretend it's like the first page of a book, right? The author, Stephen King, doesn't start with, oh, by the way, I'm Stephen King. That's on the flap, right? That's on the intro. So just start with a story and hook them, and they'll already be leaning forward in their seats.
I love that you just said that, and I recently had a conversation with Christina Rasmussen. She's the author of Second First, and I also interviewed her in this series. And she told me the one that really stands out to her is Arianna Huffington, who I think it's her book that starts, I woke up in a pool of my own blood.
Yeah,
and it's because she was overworked, or, it was one of those stories like you and I probably have of just our body physically saying, like she kind of, I think, fainted and hit her head or something like that.
Right.
But it just, you're absolutely right that instead of starting with that narrative, you can start with something so powerful as though you're kicking off a novel or a memoir, and what's going to really hook people in and create that connection, because also sometimes the bio creates distance because you're this expert, you're this fancy person that can't be anything like them.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And yeah, you're 100% right. It can be your story. Right. It just shouldn't be the same bullet points that are in your thing. It should be something like, I woke up in a pool of my own blood. Now, the guy who was checking Twitter is like, what? Just, everyone is instantly locked in you. And then, to your point, practicing those pauses and waiting. Another tip I would give as far as practice is do an Ignite talk. Find an Ignite session. So for anyone who's listening, if you know what an Ignite talk is, it's 5 minutes and it's 20 slides. So each slide is 15 seconds, and they auto-advance. You don't get to, there's no clicker. So cool. It's all on a timer. So you have to, the slide's going to advance whether you're on point or not. So you really have to practice, but it's very, it's daunting, and there's a big lack of control because the slides are auto-advancing. But with a little bit of practice, with 2, 3, 4 hours of practice, that gives you a lot of time to spin through 5 minutes. And then when you can nail the transition, when the slide comes and your loud word is perfect timing with the slide. I did a Ignite talk at the Lean Startup Conference in San Francisco, and it's sort of like the Mark Twain quote, like, if you want me to speak for an hour, I'm ready right now. If you want me to speak for 5 minutes, I need 6 months to prepare.
Yeah.
And the Ignite talks being so short, but 20 separate slides, it's a format that's designed to keep the audience engaged because everything moves so fast. They tune in because it may be a train wreck, but if you practice just a little bit, you can come off really good. And then you have this sort of 5-minute great talk for your speaking reel or examples.
Yeah, I love that. That's great advice. I know one of the things that you do when you practice is also that groundwork and the advanced prep of the physical space that you're going to be in. Can you share a little bit more about that process?
Yeah, I might be a little bit neurotic in this sense, but I've given talks in enough differently shaped rooms that some of the hotel conference rooms are almost like a long bowling alley. I went to one a couple of years ago where there was a few hundred people there, but it was only one. There were 6 seats wide with an aisle in the middle, so 3 on each side. So each row was only 6 people, and then it just kept going back. It was like a very skinny, long bowling alley style room. And for that, you need, like, I make slides really, really big and big images and big words. So I try to design for the back of the room, but in that particular case, even the back of the room wasn't going to save me. So like I couldn't make slides big enough, so I did that one without slides. So knowing what the room is going to be like, how deep, how wide, how many screens, how big are the screens, when you see things like Dreamforce and things like that, there's a speaker on stage, but there's massive, huge screens in multiple places in the room. So then more people can see your stuff. But in some smaller venues, maybe there's only one screen. I gave a talk last week at the Manhattan Inventors Association, and they had an LCD TV screen, but it wasn't like a big, huge projector.
Right.
So, you have to design for the back of the room. So I love scoping out. I even have a standard email. I can send it to you that says, kind of asks the conference coordinator, because it's in their best interest to tell you this as well. They want the best content, the best conference. So I say, like, what's the shape of the room? Where's the speakers? Obviously you need to know how long your talk is, things like that. But it really just takes all these variables that could cause nervousness or confusion or panic out of the thing. And then if possible, usually it's possible, like, even if you're in another city the night before, when I was in New Orleans recently, the night before, not just the sound check and making sure they had the right computer dongles and the slides projected okay, but just a full-blown, sit in different areas of the theater, see what the screens look like, see what the thing looks like. Usually you don't have to worry about sound, because usually the sound, hopefully the audio folks will take care of that, but the visual is all up to the speaker.
That's so smart. I'm really glad you said, too, about just the emailing them in advance, and it's in their best interest. I travel with a speaking kit that has a clicker, an adapter. You should always have your charger, because they may or may not have them, and they may or may not work. So I find it's nice to have my own equipment. And then I recently met a speaker who travels with his own lavalier mic, which I've run into the issue of a handheld cord on the bottom, or where I have to stand behind the lectern, and I'm sort of frozen at this lectern because they don't have the equipment. So I think to the extent that someone can actually have their own kit, it's just like you do, and kind of give those have those questions and make those requests is really helpful.
Yeah, one link you can drop into the chat or into the course is Seth Godin's Speaking Rider. He goes through all these things specifically because he's been given so many talks for so many years that, like, he just doesn't, we're not all at that level, but he just doesn't do handheld corded mics. He doesn't do stand behind the podium if that's the setup. He basically says, before I speak, you have to agree to all these things, and like a wireless lav mic tie clip is the kind of thing. He talks with his hands and both hands and things like that. So it's a very simple thing to do. I like to talk about easy things and hard things. It's hard to develop a really, the skill of speaking emphatically and communicating messages and everything else. Like, it's to become a really great speaker, it takes a lot of work. To make sure that your slides present and the clicker works and your lavalier, like, those are really easy things. Anyone can do them. And yet, if you're a great speaker who delivers great stuff, those are the things that can derail you if they go wrong. So if you're at that caliber and you're getting paid to speak, just do what you need to do, whether it's them or you, to make sure that those won't derail your great content, your great message.
I love that. And I love the distinction between the easy and the hard. And you're right. Yeah. Those are relatively easy things. You just have to kind of know to think about them.
Right.
That's so great. What about, so all the practice in the world and all the advanced prep is great, but what do you do on the day of when things go haywire? Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, it has. Sometimes it doesn't as much anymore because now I try to, like I said, the run through. But yeah, if the slides don't work, hopefully you know your content well enough that you can sit up there and have a great presentation. Some of the ones that I do with a lot of slides and it's very visual, it wouldn't work as well. But what I've done is the backup plan. You need to have a backup plan. You need to pretend like the power goes out except for the microphone, and they still want you to present, right? You're still there. You're still getting paid. So again, it's back to that: what change are you going to cause in the audience? If you know your content's super cold, you could even flip up the structure and the format on the fly. If things go haywire, let's say it was an hour-long talk or 45-minute-long talk, and I lost, the ability to present 200 slides, I would, cover off the main topics in the most energetic way possible, and then maybe extend the Q&A from 5 minutes to 15 minutes and get that interaction back and forth with the audience. I think it's interesting because Gary Vaynerchuk has talked about this as well. He's like, I think all talks should be Q&A, because that's where you get a lot of the value of the back and forth. And Seth does a lot of Q&A when he does like the day-long events. He'll maybe do an hour or two of presenting information, and then he'll do 4 or 5, 6 hours of Q&A. And in a small venue, almost everyone gets their question asked, so they really feel like they got value. And as we know, when someone asks a question, 8 other people in the room have the same question. They just didn't raise their hand. So I think when AV might go haywire, I would say your sort of ace in the hole trick is present a shorter version of what you're going to do, and then open it up for more Q&A, because that gives you a chance to engage with the audience.
Awesome. That's a great practical suggestion just to have. And I love that you said
you look more like a pro, because if you start stumbling and stuttering and blushing, like you're getting all flustered, the audience sees that. Imagine if, Gary doesn't really present with slides, but imagine if he did and they didn't work, he would just be like, okay, screw it, we're doing Q&A. Like, you know what? By looking ready and not flustered, and changing the format and just saying, like, you know what, whatever is around me broke, I'm just going to take charge and change the format. You also look more like a pro and more like you're in control of the situation versus being on the receiving end of these AV problems.
I love it. And that's really plan A, B, and C. It's like A is your full slides, B is a abridged version without maybe all the slides, C is when shit goes down, you can just go into Q&A. It's so great.
Right. And you can even go into Q&A and say, while the AV team tries to figure out this mess, let's just do Q&A. Yeah. Brilliant. And it gives them some time because they're panicking.
Right. Right. Brilliant. When I love what you said, because I use this Seth quote too, of the only purpose to give a talk is to change an audience. What do you think? Let's say the slides go haywire. What is the one thing that's going to impart that message and that change that you seek to make?
Well, hopefully the slides should support it, but hopefully you just telling your message, like I've seen you speak and communicate really, really effectively, great messages. So when Seth speaks, whether he's got the slides or not, if you left his tribe's talk, you totally were changed, that you understood the importance of a tribe, and he challenged you to go lead one. And whether you did or not, that challenge was made very clear, whether there were slides or not. So I think knowing, and that kind of goes back to the practicing the last minute, and it's worth writing out longhand, what is the change I want to see in my audience? It doesn't mean that you have to say those words on stage, but if Seth would have written that out, it would have been, I want people to understand the importance of tribes and to go lead one. Everyone should do that for their talks and say, what's the change if they took one thing away? I used to talk a lot about social media ROI because businesses would dabble in social, but they wouldn't know how to tie it to real business benefits. So one of my, what's the change I want to have affect the audience, was I want them to understand that it is possible to calculate social media ROI and understand a basic framework of how to start doing it in their business. So it happened to be more in the kind of informational how-to. It was kind of half
Right.
informational, half inspirational. I told a story about a business that reached out to me on Twitter and eventually achieved social media ROI, and kind of walked them through how that. So it was like instructional via an inspirational story, which I think can be another good model.
Yeah, absolutely. I love your idea too to really think about a challenge for the audience, not just a question, but what you want them to do. If
Yeah.
there's only one thing as a result of your talk, that's so great.
If you see in Seth's speaking writer, there's some other little gold nuggets in there to ascertain for yourself. He says, I prefer, or it's great if the audience has a full-blown like lunch break or coffee break after my talk.
Oh.
One, it allows, if people do want to come up the stage and, get a book signed or whatever, or if their mind is spinning with all these things that he's prompted them to do and they want to go talk about it in the hallway with their friends, as opposed to ending it and going right into the next talk. So I think that's another thing I've started to dial in a little bit more when I do speaking, is figuring out which speaking slot, if there's a possibility or if certain things are available. There are better slots for sure and worse slots for sure.
Right. This is awesome. Well, you've shared so many great tips. If you could recommend the top 3 tips, tools, or resources for people to improve their practice or just their speaking in general, what would they be?
Yeah, so one is Nancy Duarte's Resonate book.
Awesome.
Now it's like this cool interactive iPad app, but there's a 2-page spread of the book that just says like the process or the process recap. That 2-page spread is worth the price of the book, $25 or whatever it is, just by itself, and then the rest of the book is gold. She talks a lot about reverse engineering Martin Luther King and Steve Jobs, some of the best presenters of all time, and understanding the way the world is and the way the world could be, and how to apply that to your topic. So Nancy Duarte's Resonate. Number 2, I would build your own kit, and it doesn't have to be. It can be a combination of communication and an actual thing that you take with you. But to have a talk go poorly because of some clicker or AV issue is sort of unacceptable for a really smart person, because for $10 we can all solve that problem. So do whatever you need to do between communicating with the event organizer and building your own kit, like you say, and just have it. It can fit right in your laptop bag really simply. And when you talk about like looking like a pro, you look like a real pro when there's a missing adapter for your Mac. You'll go, I have it. Just don't forget it. I've done that. I've left them everywhere. And number 3, I would say, literally just practice in front of people. Like, get feedback from other people, and ideally, if you can, research the venue, and if you can match where you practice to something like that. If it's a wide, shallow room, maybe practice in a wide, shallow room, but do a dry run. And then, I guess, related to that, one of the biggest mistakes I made in my whole speaking career thus far is creating a completely new talk for each conference, versus being known as the person. So we'll use Seth as an example again. For 2 or 3 years, he gave, or maybe for a year and a half, he gave the Tribes talk, right? That was the book he had out, so that was the talk he gave. And then he customized it a little bit to the audience, but to the whole point of practice, there's no better practice than delivering it live on stage in front of a huge crowd. So if you see giving that talk as practice for that next talk the next time, even if you tweak it a little bit, where did they laugh, where did they not laugh, that's when you really get to the A game as a speaker, is giving the same talk enough times that the talk itself becomes the practice. I made this silly mistake of I would have to practice each time individually for a whole new talk, whole new slides, and then for the next conference, I would work with them to develop a whole new topic or a whole new talk, as opposed to saying, no, let's talk about social media ROI, or let's talk about crowdfunding. So now that's, I guess, one takeaway tip is develop your 2 to 3 or 4 standard talks that you give. Doesn't mean that you can't personalize it or tweak it, but then also on your speaking page, put those, say, these are what I talk about, and then if you can have a custom specific testimonial to that talk, where it's like, Jenny inspired me so much about X, or Clay taught me so much about crowdfunding, then the person who's booking you as a speaker can see, oh, that's the topic I need, and people seem to love it. So.
Right. Fantastic. I know that's been hugely helpful for me too. What's your definition of what it means to speak like a pro?
I think to develop a speaking practice that you're proud of, that makes you money, and that changes the audience, that carries your message. That's really moving. Speaking like a pro is, like we said, changing the audience and making a career that doesn't give you all this stress and anxiety. I think if the litmus test might be that, if you're looking forward to giving talks instead of dreading giving talks, I think you've made it as a pro.
That's awesome. Clay, thank you so much for sharing all this wisdom. It's incredibly helpful. Where can people find you if they want to keep in touch with your work?
Sure. You can just go to clayhebert.com or crowdfundinghacks.com, either one.
Awesome. And that's Hebert, Hebert.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Yes.
Good. And everyone, you can also go to jennyblake.me/speaklikeapro, and I will summarize Clay's awesome wisdom and all the resources that he mentioned. So Clay, thank you for sharing all that too. We really appreciate it.
Of course, you bet.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jenny.
Bye.